Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. This is a fantastic turnout here for the first proper Hustings we've had here in Worcester, and I'm so pleased it's the University of Worcester that's packed a room out for it. For those who don't know me, where have you been? But my name is Ross Renton. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the University, and I'm chairing today's Hustings. Before we introduce our candidates, I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of what a Hustings, if you haven't been to one before, is an opportunity for us to ask questions of those who have put themselves forward for election for the seat here in Worcester. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions that are important to you as an individual, to the institution, to the student body, or if you're a staff member, as a staff member here. We are really up for open and healthy debate. At the same time, I would say we also meant to make sure that it's done in such a way that allows for a debate to happen. So if I feel at any point that we're not keeping up with pace, or it's not going the direction that it should be to ensure that there's healthy debate, I'll cut in and I'll be as Glaswegian as I can be with you. So it really is to ensure we get lots covered this afternoon. An hour is not a long time to do this. And so when you ask a question, if you can give a fairly short question, I know you might have lots to say and want to share lots, but the more we can get through questions-wise, the more you can get from today. And I'll say this to the candidates as well, if you can give fairly short answers, I know politicians not all get the reputation for short answers, but they've assured me they will this afternoon. So before I get started, I want to introduce our candidates. So our first is Lynn Denham for the Labour Party. Our next is Stephen Kearney for the Liberal Democrats. Might want to give a wave, or some are wearing the lovely rosettes. Martin Potter, who's the Independent candidate. Louis Stephen, who's the Liberal Democrat. Sorry, Green. I changed your party for you. There's a little bit of a pattern going on in certain parts of the country, so you can forgive me for that one. And Robin is the Conservative candidate, Robin Walker. And what I'll do is I'll ask them to give 2 minutes of an introduction. So what is their policies? What will they do for you? Once they're done, I'm going to open out to you for you to ask some questions. The kind of themes that we expect to hear, I was saying this to the candidates, I know from speaking to some of you already, around education, around health, housings came up. There might even be the B word mentioned, Brexit that being. So if there is that, then the candidates, I'm sure, will be ready to answer your questions. So if we can start, please, with Lynn, with your 2 minutes. And I will be hard to make sure we stick to the 2 minutes.
Thank you. How are we doing for sound in terms of the microphone? Can people hear me if I speak like this? Yes?
I'm seeing the phone at the back of the room, yeah.
Because you're mic'd up, you're at an advantage. I want to be Worcester's MP because I think it's time for real change. After 9 years of austerity and cutbacks to our public services, we desperately need a different approach and to rebuild Britain. I'm standing for a number of people in Worcester. The young man who works in Lush, who's too young to vote, but for whom the real living wage is a massive difference. And makes a real difference to his life. I'm standing for the GP at the end of his tether with insufficient staff and with too many patients to see. I'm standing up for the people who don't take their medicines because they can't afford the prescription charge. I'm standing up for those that have lost their bus services. I'm standing up for the youth workers who have been made redundant. For the teachers who are able to meet the needs of children because the class is too big, they've lost their teaching assistant, there aren't enough books and crayons. I'm standing up for the planet and to make a difference to the climate emergency. And the Labour Party has a number of policies to offer that we have carefully thought through that have been costed. I'm seeking better work for Worcester, more secure jobs, a real living wage of £10 an hour immediately, to be an environmental champion and to actually bring in the measures for a green industrial revolution, to to incentivise moves towards zero carbon rather than put blockages in the way. Campaigning for better buses, free bus passes for under 25s. Bus service in Worcestershire has all but disappeared, and we need a Labour government to bring that back, to bring that investment back. We will scrap tuition fees and bring back maintenance grants, and we'll fight for NHS funding around mental health services and every other aspect of the health service.
Thank you very much, and round of applause if you want. Continue on. I have an extra mic here in case people couldn't hear. This is where my technical ability. I'm going to hand it to you. What I would say is, there with the round of applause, is it's not easy to stand for it as a candidate. So if we can give that kind of support to each that comes up, obviously if you disagree then you don't need to, but it is quite a scary thing to sit in front of you all. Not that I'm saying that, I think you're lovely, but it is quite a scary thing to do this, so I'm very grateful to the candidates. Our next speaker is Stephen Kearney from the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. That's right. Hi, it's great to see you all. I'm deeply disturbed at the lack of leadership in the world right now. I'm extremely concerned about the way our politics has been driven between extremes. I am extremely worried for your generation about the interference in British politics of Donald Trump, of the Russians, which is very real. And I think we really need to wake up to that. And I'm disturbed about the lack of leadership at the grassroots of our community, the inability of politicians to actually be able to really develop a relationship at the grassroots of communities and really help people to understand what is going on. The disgraceful behaviour of some politicians who are creating smoke and mirrors deliberately just to take power is appalling. And I have 6 grandchildren, and I'm petrified for them. I'm petrified to see Donald Trump behaving in the way he's behaving, creating massive divisions between China and the West. I'm petrified by the behaviour of Putin, who without a doubt influenced, and the evidence is coming out and it's going to fall into the lap of the next government to deal with. Brexit was interfered with, the American election was interfered with, our very democracy is absolutely under threat. And I'm fighting with a very strong manifesto to represent Worcester to start to tackle some of the most important issues that we faced. I've touched on some of them. But the state of the environment, where we're heading. I watched a video today, and in the last 100 years, we've more or less seen the ice cap in the Arctic vanish. Our environmental emergency is real. And this is what I mean by lack of leadership. Our politics is infiltrated, our environment is suffering. So I'm looking forward to debating with colleagues about some of those issues today. And thank you for welcoming me.
Thank you very much, Stephen Kearney from the Liberal Democrats. Our next speaker is Martin Potter, who's the independent candidate.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's the place where my father qualified as a teacher trainer back in the late 1950s. It's one of the emergency measures which the country was undertaking at the time to get a lot of teachers qualified very, very quickly indeed. So I'm very happy to be back here today. The one thing that I would say, so those who may not know, I was originally the Brexit Party prospective parliamentary candidate in Worcester. You may have heard that Nigel Farage withdrew Brexit Party candidates in seats like Worcester, which has an incumbent Conservative MP. But we thought that was important to be able to give people the real choice, people who actually believe in Brexit, want Brexit, and want to be represented by somebody who wants to deliver that. But this election is also about trust. Trust is partly part of Brexit, but also trust in a lot of other things. And you've heard a lot of promises being made by all the parties during this campaign so far, an auction of promises. And you have to ask yourself whether all those things can be believed and what is realistic for this country and for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Martin, independent candidates. And our next speaker is Louis Stephen from the Green Party.
Right, good afternoon. This is the climate emergency election. This is the climate emergency election, and it is an emergency, possibly even more important than Brexit. You've all seen David Attenborough on the TV with things like the Blue Planet. We've seen the school strikes being led by Greta Thunberg, and we've seen the Extinction Rebellion doing all their protests. And they've raised awareness of the environmental issues that we face to a very high level. But at this election, you have a chance to take action. You have a chance to vote Green. You've seen bushfires and droughts in Australia and in the South America. There's still the rainforest still on fire. Even though the TV cameras have moved away from those scenes, they're still on fire. We've also seen floods and heat waves that go across Europe, and they're increasing their intensity and their frequency. And the last 5 years have seen the 5 hottest years in recorded history on the planet. And I think that is absolutely shocking, if not terrifying. We've seen plastic pollution in our seas with things, the iconic images of things like a turtle with a plastic bag around it. We've seen soil erosion, habitat loss, a loss of biodiversity. And we've seen air in our cities, which is so dirty that it's literally killing people around the globe, including in this country. It's killing people today. There is one party that has the environment written deeply into its DNA, and that is the Green Party. What we are proposing is what is needed to be done, not what is expedient to be done. What we are talking about is a massive investment, £100 billion on home insulation, solar panels, carbon capture, more trees, public transport, you name it. I think I've run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Louis Stephen from the Green Party. And our final introductory speaker is Robin Walker from the Conservatives.
Thank you very much, Ross, and thank you for the welcome. I am running in this election because I believe we do need a Conservative government to take this country forward, to continue to deliver a strong economy and to continue to deliver investment in Worcester. But I'm also running with a track record of having campaigned on key local issues, issues that make a difference to people in Worcester, like our hospital, having secured a new radiotherapy unit, a new midwife-led care centre, birth centre, and a new breast cancer unit at the hospital. I'm now campaigning to try and get an upgrade to our A&E. I think it is necessary, I think it is important, and I think we should also see a medical school in Worcester at this excellent university, which already trains nurses brilliantly, but I think should be able to train doctors for the future. I've campaigned on fairer funding for our schools and helped to close the gap between the big cities, which traditionally receive much more funding for schools, and places like Worcester and places like Worcestershire. And as a result of that, there is millions of more investment coming into our schools. I've campaigned for more school places and I've campaigned for a better environment. Louis is right to talk about the climate emergency, and I'm very proud to have been part of a government which was the first of any major European economy, any major Western economy, to vote for net zero, to put legislation on the statute book setting a target for net zero. I want to make sure we deliver that with the jobs that it can create through things like investment in hydrogen technology at Worcester Bosch, through programmes to upgrade housing, both making it more affordable and more environmentally friendly. And I will continue to campaign on local transport issues, such as improving the roads around Worcester to reduce congestion. I secured £50 million from the government to upgrade the Southern Link, which is a project politicians have talked about for years and for decades, but I've been able to deliver that. You can see the work going on today. A better train service, both in the direction of London, to get more investment in our city by getting a 2-hour journey time to the capital, and in the direction of Birmingham, where we desperately need more carriages on our train lines. These are things I will carry on campaigning for as an MP, but I will also campaign to respect the fact that 29,000 people in Worcester, more than have voted for any MP on the current boundaries in Worcester's history, voted to leave the EU, and I think we should do it with a deal.
Thank you very much. Robin Walker, the Conservative candidate. Now, this is my 4th Hustings I've chaired at the University of Worcester. This is the largest turnout we've had. I've only been here 4 years, so it's pretty good going to have such a great turnout, but also to have 4 Hustings in that time. I think of the Bristol woman who said, "Oh no, not another election." I'll try not to do a Bristol accent. I'm going to now open out to you to ask questions of the candidates. You don't have to ask a question of every candidate. There might be something specific that you think particular people you'd want to ask of. However, it is helpful if it's something that's broad enough that everyone can contribute to it. Now, we're using the Student Union, so I'm going to give a little bit of a privilege to our Student Union, give them the first question, but then I will open out to everyone else. So any of the Student Union executives that are around who want to ask the very first question, because we're using your beautiful building, I'll give it to you. So if you can give your name, this is the same for everyone, just say your name and your question. Remember my rule about keeping it brief.
Cool. So hi, my name's Meg, I'm Vice President Education here at the Students' Union. And I represent the students. Sorry, Ross, my question is a two-parter. So firstly, there's obviously been a surge in young people registering to vote. What in particular is your party doing to engage young people? And secondly, there's been a development in the Riverside campus being used as a polling station, which I think is fantastic, as the university have really inclusive facilities and we're a really important part of the community, so I think that's fantastic. There were talks of St John's campus being a polling station on the university. However, this was declined. I'd really like to know your views on this and what you think should be happening. Because I really do think that it's a travesty that this facility is not being used.
Okay, thank you very much, Meg. Who would like to go first? Go on, Lynn.
Can you hear me? At the back? Yep. Okay, good. So the Green Party have... So the Green Party earlier this year were part of the registration drive. We had a stall here and we were helping to increase the numbers registering to vote. And I think it's really important that we do that. I'm going to keep this fairly short because I know that obviously you've got time limited. But you've got a very specific question about the polling stations, and I was actually part involved in that. I'm guessing that might be one of the questions being given. I think in principle, you're absolutely completely right that having polling stations near and in student areas has got to have a massive positive effect on increasing turnout. And I think the particular example you gave would have been a great place to do it. Unfortunately, we cannot have any political bias on this. It has to be done in a fair way. And the officer who actually looked into this, they looked at all the range of different options and they looked at the current school where it's at, and it was their decision that it was to be left where it was. Personally, I would have loved it to be moved into the university, but I think sometimes we have to follow the advice from officers.
Thank you. Maybe Robin, next one, we'll just walk around.
Yeah. I mean, basically, I think more people registering to vote, more people voting is always a good thing. And I think all of us, as we go around canvassing and knocking on doors, if we find people who aren't on the register, we should be giving them forms, encouraging them to register and encouraging them to get out there. With regards to polling stations, I've sort of generally had a policy of not getting involved in conversations around polling stations for obvious reasons. But the one area where I have is where schools have contacted me and raised issues about having to potentially close down in the event of having elections. I have lobbied the council on behalf of a few of those, and I'm glad to say a few of those schools where they used to have to close entirely for safeguarding reasons, the council has sensibly taken the polling station out of the school. So I think it's important that they do step in those type of issues. I think with regard to the polling location of individual polling stations, it's right that of course officers should take the first view, and then I think councillors are absolutely entitled to raise their views as to where they should be.
Oh, sorry. John?
No, I just don't need the mic. Yeah, thank you. I think the first part of the question was about engaging young people. I'll leave the polling stations to everybody else. In terms of engaging young people, I mean, obviously we've got a lot of things on our plate at the moment, and the Green Party and the Liberal Party talk about a great deal in terms of climate change. It is about thinking of the future, but it's thinking about the future in other senses as well. We've just recently got to a target which Tony Blair said of 50% of young people going into university education. But yet we're listening a lot of the time to lack of skills and shortage of skills in our country. So somewhere we've got a mismatch between what we're investing in terms of our young people and what we actually need. And that's both at university level, but it's also in terms of apprenticeships. There has been a new apprenticeship levy, but unfortunately apprenticeships in terms of take-up have gone down. And that is the way that I believe that we need to engage young people more by talking about their future and how that will work.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, I think education is absolutely critical. A Tory government in the 90s more or less removed political education from the curriculum, which I think was a disaster. That chicken's now come home to roost. With 3 or 4 colleagues, I founded the UK Youth Parliament back in the 90s. And the reason for that was when we were listening on the streets of the UK, we were finding that people just felt completely disconnected and cut off from the political process, which is why we founded the UK Youth Parliament. And what we did was particularly when I got involved in party politics, some of my friends went to the Labour Party, some went to the Greens, I went to the Liberal Democrats, and we went in there with a strategy. And for me, the strategy was to get the Liberal Democrats to really understand the importance of listening in the community, building on opportunities for young people to get involved, and actually have actions rather than just words, actually have actions, which is why in government, and if we have any power when everybody comes together, we will introduce voting rights for the 16 to 18-year-old age group. No ifs, no buts. Most people that I have talked to, young people over many, many years, have all said the same thing. We are disenfranchised. If we can go and fight in their armies when we're 16, why can't we vote? If we can marry when we're 16, why can't we vote? These actions are critical, I think, in terms of really ensuring that young people have a say. I think when it comes to polling booths, I think we do need to take them much closer to the people, but I do tend to think that the officers really need to consider that. And if they can't get their act together to do that, we need to legislate to help them. But we definitely need to take polling booths closer to people. And we need to ensure as well that we don't stop people voting. The latest thing from the Tories is take voter ID to the polling booths. Another outrageous move by them to stop young people voting. Unacceptable.
Thank you very much, David. And Lynn Denham.
Thank you. Stephen is a trained actor, hence the voice projection. I can't match that. The Labour Party is full of young people and young activists. We are a member-led party, and our policies are formed by young people, young people's voices are listened to within the Labour Party, and I think that's really, really important, and that informs the offer that we have. It informs every part of what we do, and Labour, before the break-up of Parliament this time, tried to get the voting age reduced down to 16. 16 and 17-year-olds have opinions, have a future, have a stake in this country, should be able to vote. And one of our key planks is about fair pay for work undertaken. Now, apprenticeship wages are too low. The so-called national living wage, which is merely a renaming of what was formerly the minimum wage, for under 21s is only £7.70. That's not enough to live on. That's not enough to be independent. We would bring in a real living wage for everyone without age discrimination, but depending on the value of the work done. I've been a Worcester City Councillor since 2012 and a member of the University Community Forum. And I think I have raised on a number of occasions student access to voting and politicians' access to students. You do have the right to vote, and the university does a superb job in helping people to register to vote, but living in the blocks, living behind
security codes as a gated community, as a local politician, I can't come round and put leaflets through your door. The Labour Party does a great deal over social media and other means, but there is something about the apps, and this is brilliant, but you are only, again, a small subset. There is some practical discussions to be had around access and dialogue between students and politicians.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to get you to do something before I go to the next question, which is, if you have registered to vote, can you raise your right hand for me? Which is pretty much this at the whole room. Keep your right hand up. You're now going to pledge to me you're going to speak to 10 people today and then get them to register and get them on board. Not taking a applause any time. Are we going to do that?
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I could have tricked you into that. Someone was right up with their hand before. We've got a roving mic, so if we can get that to you. Remember, just give your name and then the question. We'll try and stick to quicker answers, maybe, so we can get through some more questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Mike Collins, third year politics and history student. I'd like to hear what all the candidates are going to say, but I'll start with Robin. Do you think trust and honesty is important in this election? What are you thinking about that? My real question is about the National Health Service. I'd like to hear what you've got to say about 4.4 million people on the operation waiting list at the moment, at the end of September. 84% of patients were seen within the 4 hours in A&Es nationally, but that's against a target of 95%. And an even worse one, from my point of view, only 77% of cancer patients were seen within the 62-day limit that your government has set, when your target is 85%. You've missed all your targets on the NHS there. I'd like to know what you've got to say about that, but I'd also be interested to know what the other candidates have got to say too. Thank you.
So let me start. I mean, there is definitely more investment needed to make sure our NHS can do the job we all want to see it do. And what we are seeing is, you mentioned some statistics there, there are tens of thousands more people being seen within the 4-hour waiting time than there were 5 or 6 years ago. The challenge is that the demand on NHS is increasing exponentially, and it's doing that for a number of reasons. More people are living with long-term conditions, people are living longer, and therefore we need to make sure we invest both in the staffing, and we have more than 60 more doctors at our hospital now than we did when I was first elected in 2010, but we need still more. And we also have more nurses, but we also need to make sure we invest in the facilities. And in my view, I've argued for a long time, Worcester's PFI hospital was built too small without that long-term plan to expand it. The only way we're going to address that is to significantly expand the capacity, and that is why, having secured 30 million, which has gone into beds and wards at our hospital over the last 2 years, I am now campaigning for a substantial step up on that for a further 40 million, specifically to expand the emergency department, to move the cardio unit, which is currently behind it, out into the Aikenbury Centre, and to make sure we can actually get the emergency department expanded in Worcester. I think that will help us to meet that demand, but we also need to train more doctors, more nurses, and we need a medical school in Worcester to make sure we can play our part in that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to Lynn next.
Okay. I think your question around trust and honesty is a very real one. I am extremely concerned about the attack on our democracy, that there are extremely wealthy people who have made contributions to the Conservative Party, and that there is continual attack on certain individuals and certain policies. To have a legitimate democracy, there has to be choice, and the alternative views have to be regarded as equally legitimate. Much of the Conservative Party campaign and money is spent on advertising, indirectly attacking Jeremy Corbyn. And that is probably £1 million well spent, because I hear on the doorstep people who support Labour policies, want Labour, but are being told that that individual is totally unacceptable. That is not an honest position as to where we are. I am extremely concerned about that. With regard to our NHS, I spent my whole working life in the NHS, and it absolutely informs my politics and why I'm standing here went into general management, waiting lists for surgery, elective surgery at that time for hip replacements and hysterectomies was 18 months. In fact, they were more than 18 months. People were waiting 2 years. It's that Labour government that brought in the current targets, and over a period of a few years, we brought the waiting lists down from 18 months to 18 weeks. Conservatives back in again, and it slips back. When David Cameron came into power in 2010, in the manifesto, no top-down reorganisation of the NHS. And then we had the 2012 Health and Care Act, which was a massive reorganisation of the NHS. It served no purpose for patient care. It did nothing for planning for the inevitable demographics that we have now. The people who are becoming frail now, the people who are in their 70s and 80s, they were born 70 to 80 years ago. That has not been planned for strategically by the current government. They've just been focused on austerity. I want to change that. The vote for me is to change that so we have proper planning for the patient need that is there.
Well, this is going to be unusual coming from a Lib Dem candidate, but in terms of the issue of trust, I think it's absolutely appalling the way the Conservative Party, and it's especially the Conservative Party, are attacking Jeremy Corbyn and are attacking Joe Swinson. I think it's dirty politics. It's out of the Trump book, it's out of the Bannon book, and Peter Walker, Robin Walker's father, who was a member of Parliament, he was a gentleman. And Robin Walker, in my view, are you a gentleman? Are you fighting politics fairly? No, but I don't think your party are fighting fairly. I think it is disgraceful. The attacks on the leader of the opposition are absolutely outrageous, and the attacks on the Liberal Democrat leader, a woman who's coming up, the misogyny behind those attacks is disgraceful. And you're shaking your head, but the people know, the people in this country know what the Conservative Party are doing. And in my view, it's completely wrong. Now, the issue of trust, I think, is absolutely critical because they are deliberately lying to the public. The Conservatives are lying to the public. And no matter how much Robin shakes his head, the Conservatives are lying to the public, and it is unacceptable. It's debasing our politics, and I am absolutely furious about it. The impact that we are having from the Russian influence on the Brexit vote and on other crucial votes in the Western world are very real and a very real threat. And Robin Walker's Conservatives are facilitating that. And he's shaking his head.
What I'm hearing is straight out of the Trump playbook.
No, it's wrong. No, it's wrong. It's wrong. And I'm standing up against it because it is absolutely wrong. You'll get to answer in a minute. But, you know, Robin Walker talks to ex-Conservatives on the streets of Worcester that come to me, and they say he's really very disturbed by what Boris Johnson is doing. Well, I'll leave him to answer that in a minute. Now, on health, health is an enormous issue, and we all want to get the NHS right, I think. Right, now in terms of the issue of trust in the NHS, I would put the two together. On the steps of Downing Street 3 months ago, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of this country, said health and social care, this is a fantastic plan I've got, these are fantastic things, great steps that I'm going to take. It's a fantastic plan for health and social care. It's not even in the manifesto. The Conservatives are lying to the public, and that has to be made really clear in this campaign.
Before I go on to the next candidate, there was a direct point made towards Robin. I'm going to give Robin the opportunity to respond if he wants.
Sure. I mean, very briefly, I just don't recognise the picture that Stephen is painting. I think you could look at my campaign literature. It's about positive campaigns for Worcester. And you know, I simply say to you, I didn't actually, as it happens, I didn't support Boris for leadership. I supported Sajid Javid, but I'm very happy to campaign along someone who's looking to put more money into our NHS to put more money into our schools and actually has a one nation vision for taking our country forward. I think what we just heard in terms of the assertion and the view
I think you know what's going on
theories is straight out of the Trump playbook, and I think people should be very, very wary of it.
I think you know what's going on, Robin.
I'm going to move on to our next candidate, which is Martin, to respond to the point made by one of our students.
I think some of the points about trust have been very well made, and I also made the point originally about a lot of this lack of trust that we have at the moment has been the result of what's gone on in Parliament for the last 2 years, and that's not what most of the people have been talking about so far. In terms of the NHS, in 2009 we had 65 doctors per every 100,000 of population, and now that's reduced to 58, which is about the national average for England, and that's the same in West Midlands as well. So there clearly has been a reduction in the quality of service. Now, we need to get back to that level of 65. Historically, it's been growing up to that level of 65, but we need to get back to that. And part of that, and I fear in terms of the capacity issues that we have in Worcester Royal Hospital and others, is that it's been loaded with too much demand, which wasn't previously there because it's been dealt with by the GP. At the moment, they're talking about even ending all home visits, and I think that's breaking that link is actually making it much more inefficient in terms of the way that we deal with patient care.
Okay, thank you very much. And Louis, finally on this question.
Okay, I'm not going to talk about the trust issue. People have already spoken about that, but what I will talk about is the NHS. I think it's undeniable that the NHS is being privatised, and I think we have to see that, building a little bit on Lynn's point earlier on about the privatisation we've been seeing. But I think it goes further than Lynn said. We have got a big problem with many of the hospitals being built during the Labour years, being built under a PFI contract. This is basically like buying some house on a credit card. We have other big systemic problems with the NHS where lots of short-term thinking, lots of fragmentation, and a separation between the suppliers and the producers. It's basically been run like a business with the profitable bits being sold off and being going to private companies. We also have lots of short-term thinking. So a classic example of that was when the nurses bursary was removed. That has made a massive impact on the NHS because we had a shortage of nurses. That then had a knock-on effect to lots of other services. And now we have a ridiculous situation where lots of the staff who are in the NHS are on short-term contracts with agencies where we're paying over the odds, perhaps 30-40% over the odds for the same sort of staff. It's absolutely crazy. So we need to also look at the bureaucracy in the NHS as well, because by separating out the producers from the buyers, what's actually happened is we've had a whole series of accountants and bureaucrats and managers and middle managers, and it's estimated that something like about 10% of the cost of the NHS is going into that bureaucratic cost, and it is purely ideological. The last thing I'm going to say is that about the financing. We do need to invest more in the NHS. We need to invest something like about £6 billion every year now to bring up the amount of funding for the NHS. But we also need to put that money into NHS bursaries and also to adult social care as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll open up to some more questions. Front row, you got there first, so I'll go there again. Just your name and the question you have, the candidates. We'll try and do quick questions and quick answers. I know it's difficult, but we'll try and do that.
Hi, my name's Alicia James. I just wanted to take a quick minute because I did feel like it was quite a personal attack. Mr. Walker, that I have seen you in the community and being involved with the schools. So regardless of points on policy, I do think you are doing a lot within the community. However, I was shocked to find, when applying for university myself, the complete inconsistency across the universities with students from Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So how can we trust a government telling us anything about student finances, really, when it's completely inconsistent and it really feels like it's being used as an empty promise to buy our vote?
Okay, thank you very much. So the question there obviously around the funding system in higher education. I'm going to probably go, if you don't mind, to Martin first and then Louis.
Yeah, indeed. You just alluded to trust again, but forgetting for one moment about the devolved powers in particular areas. Of course, people promising that we'll cancel student debt or so on and so forth. Some of that is probably unaffordable, and for people to say so, I think is being, I think that is being dishonest. Yes, we can do that, but all those other things that we're talking about doing, we have to make choices as far as what we're going to do. I think there's things which are particularly unfair in terms of student debt, and that's the interest which is charged on those on student debt. The 6% or so, whatever it is, at 6.4% or whatever it is at the moment that's being charged, it clearly will be well past the actual current interest rate, and I think that is totally unfair, and that should be cancelled. And I think any accrued interest on debt should be cancelled. That is affordable, but the whole thing isn't. But on the other hand, I think we can rebalance some of that funding. I was talking about earlier about skills shortages, and I think there are some things that, as a country, that we need to look at and say, how many of these types of graduates do we need? How many of these types of graduates do we need? Then have some sort of incentivisation to ensure that we fill what we need, not stopping anybody doing whatever else they want to do, but trying to be more clearly focused as to our skill requirements and providing financial benefit relative to filling those as opposed to others.
Okay, thank you very much. And to Louis.
Okay, I think it's a great question, and I think it's fundamental. It's a fundamental thing that all education should be free, whatever level, whether it's a school or a university. And I think it's particularly unfair, as you say, for the fact that England is separated out from the other countries within the United Kingdom. I think it's also got to be said is that none of the political parties have covered themselves with glory. It was when I was lucky enough to go to university with a maintenance grant. I had a grant to pay some of my living costs, and I had free tuition. And unfortunately, that has been taken away. The ladder's been drawn up behind me. It was the Labour government, it was the new Labour which brought in tuition fees. And then it was the Conservatives who then extended up to £3,000 a year. Then unfortunately in the coalition years it then went up to £9,000. The Green Party have been consistent all the way through and said it's a fundamental right, all education should be free, and under the Green Party we would have free tuition fees. We would also write off the debt which is currently existing today as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Louis.
Thank you. I mean, I agree there is inequity between the different countries, over a number of issues, and this is just one example of it. But quite a bit of what goes on in Westminster is about ruling England, but that isn't obviously said because of the devolved powers and the ability of different ways of doing things. There is also significant inequity between the generations. As Louis has alluded to, and I think it is unfair. A young man that I know that's heavily involved with the Labour Party, he is 2 years younger than his sister. She had an education maintenance allowance. He doesn't. He's stacked up with the debt. It's not fair. I think we should absolutely look at investing in people, investing in the skills that benefit the country and that benefit the individuals. And an absolute plank of Labour's policy offer going forward is a national education system that people can access education at any point in their lives. Not everyone is academically inclined at the right moment in the right place, and those that choose not to do A-levels are often then kicked out into different places. People need reskilling, people find interest in things, life changes. Education should be a right to all, and it should be accessible throughout life, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Thank you, Lynn. Obviously, a point was made about, from Louis about fees being introduced by the new Labour government. When they come to yourself, Stephen, about Liberal Democrats, one of the questions we do have from students, obviously, previously a pledge was made by Liberal Democrats about not introducing top-up fees. So I think it's pertinent if you can cover that in your point as well. For us.
So obviously when we went into coalition with the Conservatives in 2010, a decision was made during the lifetime of that Parliament to triple the fees. As I made clear in 2017, I was completely against it. I'm still against it. I'm probably described as maybe slightly on the left wing of the Liberal Democrat Party. But I would say, from our perspective, there is a call definitely to, within our manifesto, to reintroduce the education maintenance grants. And we're also making available £10,000 a year per person, £10,000 throughout the lifetime of every individual to carry on with further education. But one of the things that is crucial as a party is we're going to be reviewing in the lifetime of the next Parliament, if we have the power to do so, the whole system of how education is funded. The corner I will be fighting is very much that we need to really invest in our young people, we need to invest in education, so we need to get that as low as we possibly can. I think there will have to be some burden shared somewhere, because obviously things have to be paid for. So I think the jury is out. I think in the next sort of 5 years, we've really got to work out how education is funded effectively. And I know that even Boris Johnson is starting to realise that he can't do everything on his own, and is calling for cross-party discussions on some issues. And I would venture to say it's rather important that one of the cross-party discussions is about this discussion: how do we really fund and support young people through education? I didn't pay for my education, and I was delighted by that, and I think we should be really looking at that afresh.
Thank you, Stephen.
Well, first of all, thank you for your comments in opening the question. And secondly, I do think it's important to be honest about these issues. And I was asked in 2010, would I make that same pledge that the Liberal Democrats made about not putting fees up at all? And I was honest with people at this university, but I couldn't make that pledge. But I felt it was right that people should make a contribution, and that therefore there should be a balance between government funding and the fees that were there. To your point about the inequality between the different parts of the UK, you're absolutely right. It is a very serious issue, but I think we need to look carefully at what that is doing to the different education systems in different parts of the UK. And actually, Scottish and Northern Irish universities in particular have been dropping down the rankings and have been suffering from a lack of investment as a result of some of the decisions that they've taken, that their governments have taken previously, about the money that should go through. We see in Worcester a hugely successful university, which is getting more and more people from a range of backgrounds involved in university education, which is a fantastic thing and a really positive story. I come from the first generation in my family to go to university, and when I went, it was a tiny proportion of the population who were having those fully subsidised tuition fees. I don't think that was fair, actually, on all of those people who never had the opportunity to study at university, to be paying for that through their taxes. And so I think it is about striking a balance as we go forward. But I am glad that we have some honest suggestions in the Conservative manifesto around this, in terms of looking at the issue of the interest. And I personally think that should be substantially lower. I think it should be much closer to the interest rate at which the country is borrowing, which is 1 or 2%. It's a low interest rate, not the kind of 6% we're talking about at the moment. And implementing the Auger review, which does call for a lower cap on fees. I'm not going to promise people that we're going to wave a magic wand and suddenly everything's going to be free and suddenly people's debt is going to be paid off, because I think that is an unrealistic promise to make. But what I will promise is to take this issue seriously and to make sure we have a system that encourages people from all backgrounds to look at the opportunity of university as well as other opportunities such as apprenticeships.
Thank you very much. Excellent question as well. I know one of the ministers will be asking. I can see a variety of hands up. I'm going to go right to the back just to give you some exercise, Sally. Thank you. Sally Jones is our outstanding head of public affairs and press at the university. Yes, please give her a round of applause.
Ross, I think it's only fair to, given what's happened before, to give Robin Walker the opportunity to tell everyone here why not only did he not resign from the government when it was found to unlawfully prorogue Parliament, but he's now campaigning for Boris Johnson, who unlawfully prorogued Parliament. But the question I want to ask all the candidates is about the health service. Everybody knows that the single biggest danger is the shortage of staff. And I have here the latest report available on nursing and midwifery staffing levels at our local hospital here in Worcester. And I'll hold it up so that everybody can see, and half of it is red or amber. And that's bad. That's the traffic light system. That shows that there's something to worry about, or the level was considered unsafe before action was taken. And there's limited assurance, and that's the report on May and June in the summer, before the winter pressures get onto the hospital. Now, the reason for that is that 44 nurses a year were cut in 2011, every year from this university, and 274 across the West Midlands, a 17% cut. As Robin knows, I wrote to the Prime Minister about it, and we've campaigned for many years. That's 270 nurses who should have been trained and working in the Worcester Hospital who aren't. 43 joined this September. It should have been 77, but they're the missing 44. So my question is, what can members of the panel, as trust has been such an important question, do to assure me that in the new government, whoever it is, we won't have this terrible cut where people go and say we're going to protect the funding in the National Health Service, and then just a few months after they're elected, do what David Cameron did and cut it very significantly?
Thank you very much. As the question was directed to you, Robin, I'll let you go first and respond to that, but also the wider point.
No, well, let me answer the first bit first, which is around the issue of prorogation. And I think it's very clear from the judgment of the Supreme Court when they ruled that the prorogation was not lawful and could be overturned, that they were creating new law. And they made that very clear at the time. And said that this was not something which was illegal. It was something that they were creating new law, which said that Parliament could not be prorogued in those circumstances. That law was obeyed. Parliament returned, quite rightly so, and we've had the debates since. The reason why you ask if I've sort of resigned from the government. The reason why I have not resigned from the government is that I believe the government has a very important job to do in running services for the country, including addressing issues such as the ones you raise about nurse training. And as you will recall, those are issues that not only have you written about it, they're ones that I have also taken up and taken up with successive health secretaries. I'm glad that, as I said earlier, we have more nurses at our hospital than we did in 2010. There are more people being recruited, but I do want to make sure that we can train more, including through universities such as Worcester, and that's why I've been backing the campaign for a medical school. I brought the health secretary here to see for himself, and actually those colour charts which you held up a minute ago, I remember quite well, because back in June when they first became published and available, I took them in to the Minister for Hospitals to talk him through why our trust needs extra support. And since that time, it has been given significant extra funding. The 29 million that Rachel McLean and I helped secure for Worcestershire hospitals a couple of years ago has been stepped up to 31 million. Is there more to do? Absolutely yes, but what I can assure you, if I'm re-elected as Worcester's MP, I will continue to press for more investment in staff and more investment in our hospital.
Thank you, Robin Walker. To Lynn Denham next.
Thank you. I have to say, I mean, it's the first time I've done this. Mr. Potter is new to this, but the other three did these rounds of things in 2017. One of the more surreal moments of my life as a parliamentary candidate was standing in the High Street addressing a demonstration, Stop the Coup, and talking about proroguing Parliament on the High Street. It was an illegal act. People said it was an illegal act, and the demonstrations, people rose up against it. Prime Minister Johnson thought he could just push it through his own way, and those are some of the reasons that have undermined trust in politicians. With regard to the NHS question, the staffing question, I mean, see my answer above. I actually left the acute trust in 2008 and went to work elsewhere in the NHS. Prior to that time, staffing was a problem. That's why we have a significant community of Karelian staff from Karelia, because they were recruited. We were recruiting Indian nurses in the early 2000s. That is why strategic long-term planning is required. And Robin may talk a good talk now, but he voted for austerity. He voted to cut the nursing bursary, to cut the nursing places. And those are the things that have undermined our NHS's ability to deliver today. And there's a great deal to be done to repair that damage. Just another example, Labour...
Sorry, Lynn, I'm going to...
Okay. Yeah. I initiated the NHS. If we hadn't had a previous Labour government, we wouldn't have a new hospital at all. We were still working in the crumbling Ronkswood buildings up to then.
I'm going to ask Louis to speak next. Thank you, Lynn.
It's a great question. It's a good question about trust, because what we've seen over the last few weeks is a severe lack of trust. We've seen things like Twitter handles being modified to deceive people. We've seen editing of videos. But we've also seen a really spineless BBC as well. I think that they are failing to challenge these politicians properly. And I think, they are running scared of the people. You've only got to see things like the Conservative manifesto. People received their postal ballot forms on Friday and Saturday. And guess what? The manifesto, the Conservative manifesto, wasn't issued until Sunday. How much time does that give people to scrutinise it? I think there's a massive problem here of trust. People like Channel 4, some of the ministers will no longer go onto it. They're running scared. And the complete spinelessness of the BBC, I think, is absolutely shocking. I think that they should be empty-chaired on many situations, and they should be challenged.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of earlier, I'm sorry, Robin, that you're sitting there, but what is coming out of me, I've been asked by so many people in Hustings to let people know in Hustings how angry the population is about what's going on. So I'm not sorry for attacking a Tory government that is destroying our country. I'm just not going to apologise for that. This is what this period of time is about. From the point of view of the health service, we've got a major eye on that. Obviously, the Liberal Democrats are the party that are going to put a penny on the income tax to find £7 billion a year to get directly into improving services in the NHS. And because you're short of time, I won't take up too much more time. The one thing I will say is that Nick Clegg and Coalition, we hear about all the rotten stuff that happened in those days. One of the key things that Nick Clegg did was he drove through major and very important policies on mental health and young people's mental health. And you'll see the Liberal Democrats, if we have any power in the coming Parliament, really bringing that to bear and making sure that mental health services are the best in the world.
And finally, to Martin.
Yeah, I believe there's 43,000 vacancies for nurses at the moment, something of that order. I believe the Conservatives have said that they plan to recruit another 50,000. You fill those vacancies, and I think Labour Party have said 25,000 or something like that. Obviously, it is a requirement. The main point is that we can fund that requirement. That is why the overall economic agenda, which is being pursued by any of the parties, is very important to look at. Where is the money going to come from to be able to do that? At least the Liberals are relatively honest here by saying they're going to increase income tax to be able to fund that. That's understandable, it's a credible position. But most of the other parties aren't saying where that's going to come from. What I can say is that once we get out of the transition period from from Brexit, we will have money which comes from our net contributions to the EU at the moment. That will fund those additional nurses.
Okay, now we have reached 5 o'clock. It's flown in, hasn't it, this hour? And I'm sure people want to ask lots of more questions. I'm going to encourage you, I think pretty much every candidate here is on social media. I'm seeing nods, yeah, sort of nods from my right here. But I think it's an opportunity to keep asking those questions and putting. I'm going to ask one final question, which is pretty much a one-word question. I'm looking for a one-word answer. And the question is Brexit, yes or no? Lynn?
a renegotiation.
Stephen?
Well, no. If you only want a one-word answer, then you're looking for a divisive answer, and that is not the way forward. There has to be a way of healing, there has to be proper negotiation, and it has to be taken back to the people for a choice between a decent deal or
Okay.
remain.
Okay. Thank you. I couldn't trust you not to follow the rules there, but it's fine. Stephen, yes or no?
Well, I mean, we're calling for a people's vote and have been from the very beginning. We've had a general election thrust on us. We are saying to you we are the only party of Remain. It could all end on the 13th of December.
Still not yes or no.
Apart from the Greens.
Louis?
Yep, thank you. It's very clear for us. We want a people's vote, put it back to the people. We will campaign with all our strength and might for Remain. We're not scared to make a decision on that, and we will be fighting for Remain.
Okay, I'll take that for a yes.
Yes with a deal.
Yes with the deal. Okay.
Yes, respect the referendum.
Okay. As you can see, it's not always easy to get a yes/no answer from a politician, which is absolutely your choice to decide what that means.